About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the United States. I've always been a night person, so I'd often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were polite. But all of that changed in just a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police patrolled park quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street, on my side, was the silhouette of a man, dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance walking, headed straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass by me. But the closer he got, the more I realised how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky, and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still, until I could make out his face. His eyes were open and wild, head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me, but still looking skyward, a smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I'd put about half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he'd been standing, to find him gone. For the briefest of moments, I felt relieved, until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so I couldn't understand how he moved so fast. I was so shocked that I just stood there for some time, staring at him. And then he started moving towards me again. He took giant, exaggerated tiptoe steps, as if he was a cartoon character sneaking up on someone, except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say at this point I ran away, or pulled out my pepper spray or my cell phone, or anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen, as the smiling man crept toward me, and then he stopped again, about a car length away from me. Still smiling his smile, still looking to the sky. When I found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What the fuck do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone, but what actually came out was a whimper. What the fuck? Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there, smiling, and then, after what felt like forever, he turned around, very slowly, and started dance walking away. Just like that, not wanting to turn my back to him again, I watched him go, until he was far enough away to almost be out of sight. And then I realised something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way, and this time, he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off the side road and back onto a better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile, but he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk, he didn't look high, he looked completely and utterly insane. And that's a very, very scary thing to see. So this only happened yesterday, and it's been driving me crazy. So my husband and I are walking home from having a beer at a local pub around 6 PM. In terms of setting the scene, we live in a small New Zealand town, population around 2,000 people. There's a real mixed bag in terms of residents. Older folk, meth heads, low income, but increasingly commuters from our capital city have been settling here. We fall into the latter category. It's spring, so there's still plenty of light, and we were just chatting as we walked the 10 minutes or so home. After about 3 minutes, at the first intersection on our walk, I spot a cat sitting on the fence of one of the corner houses on the other side of the street from us. I say meow, and it meows back. It then starts stalking a bird, so my husband and I continue watching this house, well, the cat really, as we walk past. Suddenly, a person with a brown paper bag on their head stumbles out of the front door of this house onto the yard. Their mannerisms and how they're moving are just so strange, but not what I'd associate with being drunk. The house itself seems completely dead, so there's no party on or anything. The person then turns to us and makes eye contact through the little slits in the paper bag. Then they start walking slowly backwards towards the front door and out of sight behind the alcove. We've been walking slowly this whole time. At this point I have literal goosebumps and an intense sense of dread. When I write it down, it sounds so silly, but there was something so creepy about this person. We're still looking as we walk past the house, and the paper bag face slowly emerges from the alcove, watching us before disappearing from view again. As we walk and get further and further away, we keep turning around to look, and the same thing happens over and over. Nothing. And then slowly, but surely, the paper bag face emerges to watch us. This continued until we were at the end of the street and round the corner out of sight. It still makes my skin crawl thinking about it. My husband laughed and said it's probably some kid getting ready for Halloween or just fucking with us. And he's probably right. But I had to keep turning around to watch my back during the rest of the walk home because I was just so creeped out. This happened maybe 10 years ago when I was back in my early 30s. I was standing in line at the local pharmacy to get my prescriptions. This is a small town and I'm a regular there, so they know me on sight. I was behind a couple of other people in line and there was a couple of people behind me. I kept feeling a tickle in my hair on the back of my head, but every time I looked behind me, the guy there was a few steps back and looking at the floor. This happened several times by the time I was at the front of the line. The pharmacist told me she wanted to talk to me about my medication in the consultation room. I thought this was weird, because we both knew I'd been on this medication for years, and probably would be for life. Nothing new. I get back to the room and close the door, and she comes in from the door at the other side that leads from the pharmacy. She told me that the man behind me had been stepping forward, sticking his nose in my hair, and smelling, before stepping back and looking at the floor. This shook me pretty badly, as it's understandably such weird behaviour, especially in my little town. The pharmacy staff insisted on having me wait there until the guy was distracted, and then the security guard would walk me to my car and watch me drive off, just to make sure I was gone before Hair Sniffer came out and saw I was driving off and what direction I was going. I still use this pharmacy, and some of the same people still work there. I'll always be grateful that they took the initiative to make sure I was safe that day. Ironically enough, it makes my hair stand on end just thinking about what could have happened if no one noticed him.